Hi, it's really good to be with you again today. We've got a new session topic that I think you'll find of interest: overcoming anger with serenity. You are looking at somebody who was born angry. Quite literally, born angry. What do I mean? Well, when I was being born, in the process of birth, my mom was given too much anesthetic. And that anesthesia flowed both into her and into me while I was still in her womb. What that meant was there was an entire week when my mom did not hold me. And studies indicate today that's a recipe for disaster. That's a recipe for anger. And guess what? I was one angry little boy from the word go. I think back to my grandfather, Bappa. I couldn't say grandpa, so I said Bappa. Sometimes what I would do, this probably explains a lot as you listen to me over the series, I would not know why I was so angry. I'd lie on the floor and bang my head on the floor. Bang, bang, bang. And my grandfather, Bappa, would walk over and very gently hold me in his arms and say, as he rocked me, "My dear, dear boy, my dear, dear boy, my dear, dear boy." So as we talk about issues of anger today, and you sense that you've got a history of anger and it's been deeply troubling for you, in your mind's eye, imagine Father, Son, and Holy Spirit wrapping their arms around you and saying, "My dear, dear child, my dear, dear child, my dear, dear child." So how about you? How about you? Struggling with anger? Perhaps you've been treated in an angry fashion by other folks. It could be parents, it could be siblings, it could be friends. And you don't know why you were being treated this way, and you sense anger has built up in you and is the tonal quality of your life. Or it might be that you've simply learned a pattern of reacting when you don't receive what you deeply need or desire, the anger erupts. Some of you know of the man by the name of Dallas Willard. Here's something that Dallas said about anger. There is nothing that can be done with anger that cannot be done better without anger. Now think this through with me. Can you think back again over the last week, 2 weeks, month, when there was a situation you were engaged in, and you look back and you realize, if I hadn't been so angry, I could have handled the situation so much better. If I hadn't been so angry, I wouldn't have hurt the people that I've now hurt, and I can't get the words back. I have a friend, Rebecca DeYoung. Perhaps you've heard that name, Rebecca DeYoung. She's written a wonderful book called Glittering Vices. And she's just a good coach on desert spirituality. She had something wonderful to say about anger I thought might be helpful to you. The desert tradition makes mastering anger a key step in spiritual formation. I want to tell you about one of my favorite Abbas, Abba Moses. Abba Moses was a large African man. Before he came into a relationship with God, he was a mean man. He committed murder. He liked to swim across the Nile with a knife between his teeth, walk into a peasant's field and slaughter those sheep simply for the joy of slaughtering the sheep. He was a dangerous man, an angry man, a lustful man, a cruel man. Then his conscience was touched. I think his conscience was touched by God, and he knocked on the door of a desert community, basically asking for help. His coach when it came to anger was Abba Isidore. And here's what Abba Isidore said to Moses. Moses, what I want you to do is I want you to go in your room and stay in your room for quite a while. Eat what you want to eat, drink what you want to drink, occasionally maybe weave some baskets. I simply want you to stay in a place alone that's quiet and allow God to begin to touch you. And it was a long process. Do you remember from last session I said that spiritual formation is the slowest of all human movements? And over time, over a number of years, Moses, Abba Moses, became known for his kindness, his gentleness, and his unwillingness to judge another image bearer. Have you ever found yourself, when you get angry and you're so frustrated with what you've done with your anger, that you point to somebody else and it's almost as though you deflect your anger onto that other person and you judge it in them? And then you look back and you realize, I'm angry at them because I'm angry at me. I see me in them. And Moses came to understand that dynamic of anger, the tendency that we all have to judge somebody else in our place. They deserve to be punished. They are the one. He is the man. She is the man. So there's a wonderful story about Abba Moses that occurs toward the end of his life. He was now a leader in a monastic community, and there were some younger brothers who had caught another brother in some kind of escapade. He'd smuggled a woman into his room and was having some kind of sexual relationship. And these other brothers, of course, are just terribly upset that this could possibly happen in this monastery. And they show up and address their leader, Abba Moses, with the situation. Now, this is a big man. Remember, Abba Moses is a big man. And what he does, while they're watching, he lifts a cask of water, a huge barrel of water, since he was so strong, up onto his shoulder, pulls out a knife. That would make anybody nervous with his background. And he begins to poke holes in the bottom of the cask. The younger brothers start observing and realize he's trying to teach them a lesson. And he puts the barrel up on his shoulder and he says, "Let us go now, brothers, to judge our brother." And by this point, the brothers say, almost always in these stories, "Abba, what are you trying to teach us? Abba, what are you trying to teach us?" And Moses replies, "I'm going to judge my brother, and all the while, my own sins trail out behind me." And they're watching him, and they're slowly walking towards this brother's room. But their eagerness to condemn, their eagerness to judge, has dissipated in light of seeing the head of their monastic community so reluctant to judge this man's sin. To judge in the sense that Abba Moses is speaking of is to condemn. You are the one. You are the one. And Abba Moses knew that every person eager to judge this other brother had at least had thoughts along this line, if not acted in this way. Wouldn't it be great if we could live in a judgment-free zone? Wouldn't you like that? A judgment-free zone? Where you knew people around you were wise enough and kind enough to be able to deal with those things we struggle with and not condemn us? Jesus was that kind of person, was he not? People who were struggling with different things flocked to Jesus like flies to honey because they knew he wouldn't start screaming. He wouldn't start condemning. In fact, as far as I can remember, the only people he starts raising his voice with are self-righteous people who are so eager to condemn other folks. Let me just ask a few questions about you and about anger. When do you tend to get angry? When do you tend to get angry? Do you get angry when you're tired? Do you get angry when you're frustrated? Do you get angry when you're disappointed? When do you get angry with your children? And what does it sound like or feel like for your kids? When do you get angry with your wife or husband? If your family, for example, had the opportunity to respond anonymously, would they say you were an angry person? Those are hard questions. I know they're hard questions, but they're surely worth pondering. I'm sure that our friends, our acquaintances, our spouses, if we're suffering from this particular vice, would long for somebody to come along and say to somebody, let me help. Let me be a coach. Let me be an Abba for you. And we can get past anger to serenity, a deep peace and calm in the midst of the conflict all human beings encounter. If Abba Moses was our coach, the first thing that he might say is, oh, what helped me with Abba Isidore is he reminded me of God's grace. He had me go sit in a room for a long time, just be with myself and my history and God. Maybe you can create that kind of learning space, as Parker Palmer puts it, that learning space for you, where we can begin to deal with some of this stuff in a context of love and acceptance, not judgment and condemnation and rejection. So an acceptance of God's grace where we realize it's safe to admit I'm angry. But Lord, I want to know what to do with all this stuff. Help me, Lord. I think Abba Moses would say, show some kindness to yourself. And in small incremental steps, begin to show kindness perhaps to those whom you've hurt. How about purposely blessing in your mind's eye, blessing those who elicit the greatest anger from you? This is hard. This is hard. Blessing a mother who neglected you growing up. It may be just in your prayers. Lord, I can't stand to be with her, but I'm going to say a prayer for her. Lord, I'm saying this through gritted teeth. Pour out your blessing on my mother or on my father. And when we do so, there's kind of a reorientation that occurs in our minds and in our hearts to how we're viewing life, how we're viewing reality. Replace your anger with blessing. I'm not saying you have to walk up to somebody and say something, particularly somebody who's hurt you greatly and might still be dangerous. But there's a place for blessing in our prayer. Try to find an Abba Isidore. Who do you know who is a kind and gentle person that you can invite into your life? Someone you trust enough to say, I've got a history of anger, perhaps a history of violence, and it's killing me. I need help. I need freedom from my anger. Maybe there's an Abba Isidore that's circulating around you and you haven't spotted that person. Here's another one from Abba Moses. Dear child, I want to help you control your thoughts. You know, it's possible to control our thoughts, to actually learn to control what we're thinking about other people. Here's a desert phrase. If we allow our mind to descend into our heart, allowing your mind to descend into your heart, what can happen is what we're thinking changes from, I heard this expression somewhere, from stinking thinking to thinking that nourishes the growth of love within us. How about this one? Abba Moses says, oh, you have a very interesting house here. So many rooms. Why not make one of them your cell, your room, like I had that room? And it's a place in your house you can go into that space, quiet down, settle down, and allow God in that silence and solitude to begin to rise like filings to a magnet. Like filings to a magnet, allow circumstances that produce anger in you, angry responses in you, perhaps past anger history, just rise it up in that room into the light of Christ. In his great love, he burns out all the harm in it. Finally, I think this is extremely important. Refuse to judge. Refuse to condemn. Well, I got a final word for you. As I've shared, when I was younger, I had a lot of stuff to deal with. One of them was a tendency to find somebody else's weakness and prey on it a little bit, derive some kind of satisfaction in that. And one of my friends played basketball with me. One of my friends, we were having dinner one night, and he was kind of quiet. And he said, Chris, I just want to tell you something. And I said, sure, what do you want to tell me? You make me feel like shit. That caught my attention. This is my pal, and he's taking a chance. He's taking somebody who's got a really short temper and is apt to strike out and saying, you are hurting me. Stop it. Stop it. And that was a significant point in my life where I realized I've got to stop doing this stuff. And what happened with me is I began to take a step into something that we can call not anger, but serenity. Serenity, a deep calm and peace, even when things are not going right. Even when there's someone standing across from you or me, and everything in my mind is saying, he deserves a smack. No, he doesn't deserve a smack, a bitter word, an angry word. What he deserves is the kindness of Christ. The kindness of Christ. What a good thing that is. I hope this has been a bit helpful, and I look forward to seeing you soon.